What's going on, folks? Philip Godfrey here, and welcome to Weekly Bible Study. If it's your first time here, we're so glad that you're joining us. And if you're returning, thanks so much for coming back and joining us again, Bible Study fam. And so, the first thing I want to address is that yes, I know that I'm not live, but I am watching with you guys right now. I had a last minute schedule change that came up that caused me to have to not be able to do a Bible study live tonight, but I am premiering it, and we are. I'm here with you guys, watching and interacting with you in the comments as well. So please still put your questions in the comments. Please, kind of keep the dialogue going in the comments and everything like you all already do. So thanks so much for that. And if it's your first time here, I just want to orient you to what's going on and why we're here. And so, weekly Bible study is built off of the scriptures in Matthew 6:33, where the Bible tells us to seek ye first the kingdom of the Father and his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you. So, we gather every week to do just that, to see, seek, and serve the kingdom of the Father. All right. And so this year we have been tasked with an assignment from the Father to walk through the scriptures, the entirety of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and we're calling this series of studies entitled "From Creation to Revelation." All right, and so we're walking through the Bible book by book, chapter by chapter, and we gather. And as we gather and walk through the studies, I highlight kind of themes and summarize each chapter, and highlight the things that the Holy Spirit speaks and Holy Spirit kind of highlights to me or speaks to me to share with you all. All right. And so that one thing I do want to say is that there are, other, kind of things going on in these chapters that may not be summarized as we're talking at a high level. So please always go back and study for yourself. Please always go back and verify everything, get your own revelation, because I could be telling you anything just to keep it a buck with you. But I don't want you to believe me. I say this all the time. I want you to believe the scriptures. I want you to believe the word of the Father, okay? So always go back to that as our foundation. Let's jump in, all right? And so for midweek this week, midweek study hall on Wednesday, that we finished up First Kings. We finished up the book of First Kings. All right, we looked at chapter 17 through 22. So if you haven't looked at that, please go back and check that out. And so tonight we're going to be starting Second Kings. And we're going to look at chapters 1 through 8. Second Kings chapters 1 through 8. And so we're just going to keep going because there's really no, kind of prep work or anything. For Second Kings is just an extension of First Kings. They have the same purpose and everything that we discussed previously. So we're just going to jump right in. One thing I do want to say is that as we ended First Kings, Ahaziah was the king of Israel, and then Jehoram was the king of Judah. All right, and so we walked through all the kings up until this point, and now as we enter into Second Kings, these I just want to make sure everybody's on the same basis. This is the foundation that Ahaziah is currently the king in Israel as we enter into Second Kings chapter 1, and Jehoram is the king of Judah as we enter into Second Kings chapter 1. All right. So let's go ahead and get going. So as chapter 1 begins for the book of Second Kings, we see that Moab, which is a territory outside of Israel, they rebelled, and they were no longer peaceful with Israel after the death of Ahab. So essentially what has happened, and we'll see this in a little greater depth as we move into the next in the subsequent chapters, but what's happened was Ahab and the king of Moab had an agreement that the Moabites would pay him a certain rate every year annually in sheep, in lambs, and in rams. And so once he died, they no longer kept that agreement going. And that's what it means when it says that they rebelled against Israel, okay? And so after this, that was verse 1 in chapter 1. But after this, in verse 2, we see that Ahaziah, who is the king of Israel, that he was injured while he was walking up on his roof. And afterwards, but due to this injury, he becomes sick. And so the text tells us that he sends some messengers to go and ask Baal-zebub, who is a false god, if he's going to recover from this sickness. And we've talked about this before. Baal essentially was, it was just kind of a title of the false god or the false deity for a region or a territory or a people. So this false god Baal-zebub was was of the region Ekron, and he was the one who they kind of worshipped in that space. And so Ahaziah is sending messengers to this false god, this false idol, to determine to see what the outcome would be for the sickness that he had gotten, due to his injury. And so he sends the messengers out on their journey to go and interact with this person, or go and interact with this deity, this false deity, I guess. And so at the same time, Elijah receives a word from the Lord, the word from the Father, to go and meet these messengers that Ahaziah has sent ahead, and tell them a word from the Father. So the Father says that because Ahaziah chose to ask the false gods about the outcome of his sickness and disease, instead of coming and asking the only true living God about it, that he was not going to recover from he was not going to recover from his sickness. He was not going to get out of his bed, and he would surely die. All right. And so the messengers from that point, once they hear this from Elijah, they don't continue on their journey. They just turn around and go back to the king. They go back to Ahaziah. And when they get back, they tell him everything that Elijah has said to them, prophetically from the Father. And Ahaziah sends a group of soldiers to go and get Elijah and bring him down to him. And so this group of soldiers, the text says that there was a captain and a group of 50 soldiers with this captain. They go up to Elijah and they tell him to come and go with them, because the king has called for them. And they specifically say, man of God, the king has called for you, man of God. And Elijah answers, and he says this. Let's look at 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 10. And I'm reading from the King James Version. Verse 10 says, and Elijah answered and said to the captain of 50, if I be a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and your 50. And there came fire from heaven and consumed him and his 50. So we see that the Ahaziah's army is coming to get Elijah, but Elijah is basically fighting supernaturally here, and he's saying, "Hey, no." If he's calling fire down from heaven to come and consume these men, if he is actually truly a man of God. I'm assuming that Ahaziah is hearing about what's going on, because he after this first wave of soldiers, he sends another group of 50 and a captain, and the same thing happens. And then he sends another group. So on the third group, he sends a captain and a group of 50. And that captain, instead of going in and demanding that Elijah come out, he goes in humbly and he asks Elijah, he humbles himself and asks him to let him and his soldiers live, because he had heard that fire had come down from heaven and consumed the two previous camps that had come up. And so at this time, the angel of the Lord spoke to Elijah and told him to go with them and to not be afraid of them. And Elijah does just that. And what we see as the chapter ends of chapter 1, we see Elijah telling Ahaziah the same thing he's already told his messengers. But now he's just saying it to him directly. So let's look at that in verse 16 and 17. Excuse me. And he said unto him, thus saith the Lord, for as much as thou hast sent messengers to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, is it not because there is no God in Israel to inquire of his word? Therefore thou shalt not come down off that bed on which thou art gone up, but shalt surely die. So he died according to the word of the Lord which Elijah had spoken. And Jehoram reigned in his stead in the second year of Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, because he had no son. All right, so this is where it's a little confusing. So we had Ahaziah as king of Israel and Jehoram as king of Judah. All right, so now what we have is Jehoram. There's a different Jehoram. He's now the king of Israel. And there's a Jehoram, these are two different people, same name, who is the king of Judah. And the Jehoram that's the king of Israel, the text will go back and forth between saying Jehoram and just Joram, okay? In the King James Version, at least. And so these are, I just want to make sure, because it can get a little confused. It's going to get real confusing in a second at the end in chapter 8, but we have Jehoram as the king of Israel and a different Jehoram as the king of Judah. Jehoram, the king of Israel, is the son of Ahab, and Jehoram is the king of Judah, is the son of Jehoshaphat. All right, let's move into chapter 2. So as chapter 2 begins, we see Elijah nearing the time he's nearing the time of completion of his assignment here on earth, and is it going to be time for him to leave the earth and go to the Father. And so he and Elisha around this time are traveling together, and it's obvious that the Father has spoken to them both about this happening at this point, that Elijah's time is nearing, because as Elijah is giving kind of Elisha opportunities to be separated from him, essentially, to not be as closely knit to him. I don't know if that's the what I'm trying to say, but to not really be around. He's giving him opportunities to be removed from this process, or kind of sever himself from this commitment that they made. Essentially assuming, because he's about to die. He knows that, well, he's not about to die, but he knows that he's about to leave earth. And so as they're traveling, Elijah tells Elisha to stay where they are. He tells him to tarry here, and he's going to go ahead because the Father is sending him to a new place on an assignment. And every time, this happens 3 times, and every time Elisha responds the same way. And he tells Elijah that as long as the Father lives and his soul lives, Elijah's soul lives, that Elisha will not leave him. And the two of them continue on their journeys. And at 2 of these stops, during the 3 that they made, at 2 of these stops, the prophets in the town they were visiting with Elisha and asking him if he knew that Elijah was about to be taken as well. So clearly, all the prophets had gotten the memo that it was time for Elijah to leave, and that his assignment on the earth was drawing near to completion. And so on the final visit of Elisha and Elijah, on their final visit where they were, the city that they were traveling to Jordan. And the text says that Elijah took his mantle. So he took his mantle off. A mantle, we talked about that when we were over in Leviticus, I believe. But the mantle, he took his mantle off and he struck the river. It says that he hit the river with the mantle, and the river divided so that he and Elisha could walk across. And after they crossed over, Elijah asked Elisha what he would like from him, what he would like him to do for him, because he's about to be taken away. And Elisha asked him for a double portion of his spirit. And Elijah tells him that if he sees him taken away by the Father, if Elisha sees this with his eyes, then he will receive the double portion that he's requested. But if he does not see with his eyes this happen, he will not receive the double portion. And they continued on their journey. Let's look and see what happened next. All right. So we're in chapter 2, verse 11. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elisha went up by a whirlwind into heaven. So what we see here is that they're continuing on this journey after having this conversation. And it says that there was a chariot of fire and horses of fire that came in between the middle of them, that parted them. And then that whirlwind, that chariot of fire, and those horses of fire, they caught Elijah up, and he went up into heaven. And while he was ascending up into heaven, Elijah's mantle falls, and Elisha takes it up, and then he continues on in the journey. Actually, he turns around and goes back to where they just came from. And when he gets to the river, he strikes the river with the mantle. It parts just for him, just like it did for Elijah. It's in my mind, it's like confirming the fact that, hey, the same spirit and power that he walked with, you are now walking with that same power. And when all the prophets, the school of, or the sons of prophets, saw him, they confirmed what had happened by saying that, yes, now the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha. After this, Elisha is now traveling. He goes into the city of Jericho, and the residents there come to him about an issue, saying that though the city is a nice place to dwell, the water there isn't good. It's kind of bitter, and the crops don't grow well because of all the situation. And so Elisha gives them divine instructions to bring him a pitcher like a pitcher of water that you would carry in, like a pitcher with salt in it. And he throws the salt into the water and prophetically decrees that the waters were healed, and there will be no more death or barren land because of it. And it comes to pass. All right. And the waters were healed through this divine act, I guess, of him throwing salt into the water and into the well, and making a prophetic decree. The chapter goes on and ends with Elisha going up to Bethel. He encounters some children while he's on the way who were mocking him and talking about him being bald. So he curses them in the name of the Father according to the text, and then two bears come out and eat the children. It's in the Bible. Like people who don't read the Bible, I don't know, because it's a lot going on. So these bears come out and eat these children, and then the chapter ends by telling us that he returns and goes on to Samaria like nothing ever happened. So let's move on into chapter 3. So, chapter 3, as we talked about earlier, we had Jehoram, the king of Israel, who became the king after Ahaziah, and then we have Jehoram, who's the king of Judah. And in chapter 3, the text begins to tell us more about Jehoram, the son of Ahab, previous king of Israel. So let's look at that in 2 Kings chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. Now Jehoram the son of Ahab began to reign over Israel in Samaria the 18th year of Jehoshaphat king of Judah, and reigned 12 years. And he wrought evil in the sight of the Lord, but not like his father. So he did not follow the father's commands, and he did evil in his sight. But he didn't do what Ahab and Jezebel did. For he put away the image of Baal that his father had made. So he put away the statue of Baal, this false deity. Nevertheless, he cleaved unto the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which made Israel to sin. He departed not from therefrom. So Jeroboam, as we saw from First Kings, was still wicked. He was still very idolatrous. And I believe Jeroboam was when they had the Sodomites in the land. That might have been Judah, though. But let's keep going. But as he saw, but he followed in the ways of Jeroboam, but he didn't follow in the ways of Ahab. So he wasn't as bad of a leader or as wicked of a leader in the eyes of the Father, but he was still not a good leader, not following the instructions of the Father. And so, as we saw at the very beginning in chapter 1, the king of Moab rebelled against Israel after Ahab died. We talked about that. And so Jehoram, the new king, now he gathers his army and he goes up to battle. He prepares to go to battle against the king of Moab and the Moabites. And to do this, he joins forces with Jehoshaphat, who is the king of Judah, and also the king of Israel and the king of Edom. All right, the king of Edom, and they're gonna go as they're gonna get these three armies together, these three kings, and they're gonna go up to war against as allies against the Moabites. So they were planning to go up to the battle, and the place that they were having to go and fight was 7 days away. So it was a 7 day journey, walk away from where they currently were. And there was no water along the route, according to the text. And as the people who are going, they're getting tired on this journey. And so Jehoshaphat, who's the king of Judah, asked for a prophet so that they could ask him about the word of the Father and what the Father's will is for this assignment or this journey that they're on. And they find out that Elisha is there. And so Elisha initially gives Jehoram, kind of jars at him a little bit. I guess that's how you would say, or kind of it's like, hey, you need to. Why are you here asking me? You need to go ask the Father. You need to go ask the idols of your mama and your daddy. Because he knew that they were wicked and that they follow false gods. And now he's trying to come, get the word of the Lord. So he was giving them a little bit of heat or a little bit of smoke because of that. But he continues talking to them and interacting with them because of the king of Judah was there with them. And so this does go to say that oftentimes, the people around you can help your situation or hurt it, because if Jehoram had been there by himself, Elisha wouldn't have had anything to do with him. But because Jehoshaphat was there and Jehoshaphat was following after the ways of the Father and in good standing with the Father, then Elisha was more inclined to help all three of them, and in the king of Edom there as well. And so they ask Elisha, what's the Father's will and what should they do in this situation? Elisha goes and spends some time with the Father, and he then instructs them to dig ditches and watch the Father work on their behalf. All right. So let's look at this, and then I'm going to make some statements after this. Look at verses 16 through 18. And this is Elisha. And Elisha said, thus saith the Lord, make this valley full of ditches. For thus saith the Lord, ye shall not see wind, neither shall ye see rain, yet that valley shall be filled with water. that both ye may drink, that ye may drink both ye and your cattle and your beasts. Verse 18. And this is but a light thing in the sight of the Lord. He will deliver the Moabites also into your hand. So let's stay here for a second. They received these instructions to dig ditches in the desert from the prophet. They are already tired. They are already on a journey. They are going to war, and they didn't ask him for more work. They didn't ask him for that. They asked him for the word of the Father, and the word of the Father included them doing more work in the interim. Very tedious work, very straining work. They were already on this journey, and here they are tired from the journey and digging ditches in a desert, digging holes in a desert because the Father told them to. And he told them that you're not gonna even see any clouds. You're not gonna see any external evidence that those ditches have a purpose. You're not gonna see any external evidence that what I told you is actually gonna happen. But the text tells us in verse 18 that this is but a light thing for him. And so I say all that to say that the Father has given some of you some very strange instructions. You're already tired from the journey to get you to where you are right now. And you get here, and then he tells you to start digging. He didn't give you water. He didn't give you food. He didn't give you any of the things you think you need. He didn't give you the money, but he gave you a shovel and said, start digging. He might not even give you a shovel. Dig with your hands. He's telling you to dig, and you're like, man, I'm already tired. I'm already whatever. And but you started. And there's no evidence that what you're doing is working. There's no evidence that what you're doing will ever change. But this scripture here shows us that it's possible and shows us that it can happen. And if we are obedient, it shall happen. I believe it will happen because the text tells us that this is but a light thing in the sight of the Father, your Father, that you're being obedient to. This is but a light thing. That you may not see rain, you may not see wind, the ways that the water normally comes, but after you finish digging those ditches, that valley will be filled with water, and you're going to drink from it. The people around you are going to drink from it. Your bloodlines are going to drink from it, and everything, your cattle, everything that you're responsible for is going to drink from it because you dug ditches in a desert without any evidence when you were tired and it didn't make any sense. You were obedient. That was for somebody. Hopefully that resonates. All right, let's keep going. All right. So we see that the Father declares through the prophet that they will have success in this battle against Moab, all right? And so the next morning the prophecy is fulfilled. It begins to fulfill itself because the valley was filled with water, just like he said. And the Moabites, as they heard that this coalition army is coming up against them, they began to advance towards them. And that's when they got there, they saw the valley, they saw all the water, and it looked like blood to them. And so now, instead of coming up armed for war, the Moabites believe that these army of these three kings have turned against each other and started to kill and fight each other. So they come up with their guards down because they don't believe that there's actually going to be a battle. They think that all these people are dead. But what they do is actually march themselves right into defeat because they came up with their guards down. And this army of Jehoshaphat, the army of Judah, the army of Edom, and the army of Israel, they go and they completely overcome the Moabites, and then they return to their lands after the battle is over. All right, let's move into chapter 4. And so in chapter 4, we began to kind of see a little bit more of Elisha. All right. And so this one really, the chapter begins with the wife of a prophet who had died. The prophet had died, and she's coming to Elisha asking him for some help and for some guidance. Her husband's died. There were some people that he owed money to or owed something to at the time of his death, and they were coming to take her sons as payment for his debt. And so she comes to Elisha to see if he could help. He asks her what she has in her house. He gives her a divine strategy for success in her situation. She says that she has nothing in her house. That this we'll talk about in a second. She has nothing in her house except a some oil, and so he tells her to take the oil and go to all the neighbors' houses. Go to all the neighbors' houses and gather up pots. Get as many pots as she can get from her neighbors, and bring all of those pots into her home. Close the door behind her and her sons, and then pour the oil into the pots. All right. And she did that, and when the pots ran out of oil, when the pots ran out, the oil stopped at that very moment. Let's go back. And so there's a lot of different pieces. There are a few different pieces to this instruction. The first thing was she came to him with a problem. She came to the prophet with a problem. He asked her a question. All right. The first thing he asked her is, "What do you want me to do for you?" And then he goes on to say, "What do you have in your house?" These are questions we should be asking ourselves, especially as we come to the Father. And if he leads you, and if he leads you divinely to this, to this revelation about, or to this passage of Scripture, then ask yourself these questions in your situation. Okay, he asked her, "What do you want me to do for you? What do you have in your house?" And she said she had nothing in her house except some oil. And so the thing that she discounted was actually the thing that the Father used to bring her out of her situation. And so this is why our perspective and perception of things is so critically important, because she didn't see the oil as valuable. She just saw it as a little oil. And oftentimes the thing that you do well, you don't see it as oil. You just see it as like, oh, that's just something that I do. Oh, everybody does that, but everybody doesn't do it. You do it, and you think that everybody else does it because you do it well, and you've done it well all of your life. But perhaps that's what the Father is using as your oil, and you're saying, "Well, I don't have anything," and you haven't gotten to the second part of the sentence just yet. I don't have anything except, and that's where the perspective shifts. A lot of times we get stuck as the I don't have anything. I don't have any ability. I don't have any gifting. I don't have nothing is special about. We get stuck there and saying, except that one thing over there that I haven't really showed the world, or I haven't really tapped into, or I haven't really ever shared or anything like that. So what is your one thing? All right. So then he tells her, well, take that thing that you kind of discard, the only thing that you feel like you have, the thing that you discarded, and then go and pour it into vessels. So use it. Pour it into vessels. And after that, when it's all done, go sell all those vessels. Go use that gift that you have. Use the talent that the Father has given you. Take the money, pay off the debt, and live on the rest. So one divine strategy, after she obeyed, one divine strategy completely removed her debt. And all it took was a shift in her perspective, seeing what she had as valuable, and obedience to the word of the prophet, the man of God, the word of the Father. It took action and obedience. And so after this, after that passage of scripture, or after that story in the chapter, it goes on to tell us about another one of Elisha, and another one of the relationships that he had. And so he would travel to a town of Shunem, and there was a wealthy woman, and she would invite him to eat, and to eat in her home, and she would provide for him. And so from there, I guess he had been there a few times or whatever. Maybe after the first time, he just felt like he could go back. But from there, whenever he went to town, he would stop by her home. And so she eventually said to her husband that they should basically build an addition on their home, another room on their home, so that Elisha can have somewhere to stay when he comes. So they do that, and he comes to the room, and when he's staying there in one of these visits, and he asked the lady, he said, is there anything that we can do for you? Is there anyone we can introduce you to? Anything we can kind of connect you in? Because she's been so gracious to him, and she says no. And so he asked his servant Gehazi. He says, "Hey, what does this lady need?" And so Gehazi tells him that she doesn't have a son, and her husband is now old. And so Elisha calls her in and tells her that about this time next year, she will have a son. About this time the next year, she will have a son. And she kind of pushes back at first, like, "Hey, don't lie to me," or whatever, all those things. But as the prophet, just as he said it, the word came to pass, and that time next year, she had a son. And some time after that passes, and we see that this son has turned into a younger boy or an older boy, and he's out working with his father when he starts to complain that his head is hurting. And so the father tells some people to take him home to his mother. And while he's home with his mother, the boy dies in her lap, dies in the lap of his mother. She takes him up to Elisha's room, lays his body on his bed, on Elisha's bed, and then she goes up to meet Elisha. Okay, but let's look at the conversation that she has with her husband before she goes up to meet Elisha. Now she doesn't. There's some interesting things that happens here. She doesn't tell her husband what happened, so we have no indication that the husband knew that the son was dead. We also have no indication that she told the husband why she was going to see the man of God, Elisha. All we know is this interaction that we have here. So let's look at verse 22 and 23 of chapter 4. And she called unto her husband and said, "Send me, I pray thee, one of the young men and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God and come again." And he said, "Wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath." So he's saying, why do you need to go to him? This is not the normal times that we would go. And she said, "It shall be well." Before she even left, she said, "It shall be well." And as I prepared, for tonight, this just stood out to me. It hit me in the face like a ton of bricks, honestly. Like, that is the declaration for this season. And it should be every season of our life. That no matter this woman, it didn't matter what was going on. She decreed out of her mouth, "It shall be well." Not it might be, not it may be. She said, "It shall be well." And anytime we in the text where we see the Father say "it shall be something," or the Messiah say "it something shall be done," it's always happened. And this woman decreed out of her mouth that it shall be well. So I want you to say it out loud right now. It over your situation. I don't know what your situation is, but over your situation, I want you to say, "Father, I thank you that situation shall be well." That it shall be well. That no matter what it looks like right now, it looks dead. It looks like it's sleeping in the corner. It looks gone. It looks done. It looks impossible. It shall be well. Put it in the comments too. It shall be. I'm watching y'all, by the way. I'm here. It shall be well. I'm gonna see if it's in the comments. It shall be well. The assignment that the Father is giving you that you thought you failed, it shall be well. It shall be well. I want to challenge us to remember that this week. It shall be well. So she goes, as she makes this decree, she goes and talks with Elisha, and you can go read their interaction. But she talks to Elisha, and Elisha sends back Gehazi with his staff, and he gives him some instructions to revive the boy, but it doesn't work. And so then Elisha goes down himself. He lays on the boy. It says, the text tells us that he lays on the boy. He puts his mouth on the boy's mouth, his eyes on the boy's eyes, his hands on the boy's hands, etc., etc. He stretches himself out over him. And then the text says his body began to get warm. And so he walked away for a second. He took a while, walked around, and he came back and did it again. And then the boy began to cough, and he was revived. All right. So ultimately, the young boy is healed through the miraculous power of the Father working through Elisha. And then he presents the son back to his mother and goes on about his things. And as we see the chapter ending of chapter 4, Elisha is cleansing a meal for the sons of the prophet. So this is just showing us the miracle power that was working through that the Father was working through Elisha. Okay, it's just this chapter is giving us examples of the type of power that he walked in as he walked throughout the earth. All right. And so as the chapter ends, we see that Elisha is cleansing a meal from the sons of the prophets. So what happened here, there was a famine in the land, and the sons of the prophets were cooking a meal. And so they went out to gather herbs and things that they needed for, I think they were making like stew or something. And so they go out and get those things. Well, somebody found some wild gourds, and they brought back a bunch. They gathered a bunch of them up. They bought them back, cut them up, and put them inside the stew. The issue is that they didn't know that they were poisonous, the person that did it. And so they began to eat the poisonous food, and they realized it and cried out to Elisha that the food was poison. And so he tells them to bring him some flour. He throws the flour into the pot, and then he tells them to eat it. He has cleansed the food. The Father has used a miracle working power through Elisha to cleanse their food with some flour. And they go on and eat. It's just amazing to think about. We got salt, we got flour, and Elisha's just walking around, just doing miracles like it's nobody's business, right? Let's move into chapter 5. This is another actual miracle. Actually, it's another miracle from Elisha. Chapter 5 introduces us to a man named Naaman. And Naaman is an army leader for the Syrians, okay? And basically a general in the leadership ranks for the Syrian king. And so he's very close relationally with the king of Syria, and he's a mighty man of war as well. But he had leprosy. And I was thinking about I didn't when I was first studying. I was like, why was he even how could he be in the army? He had leprosy, but then I realized that it wasn't Israel. So this goes to show us that these other nations didn't have the rules and didn't have the laws that the Father had instituted for His people. And so he, like I said, it was leper. He was a leprous man, and he, had a very high position, and was very renowned in that region. And so he had leprosy. And so eventually a young girl enters into his home and is a servant for his wife. And while there, the young maid tells his wife that there's a prophet who could heal the leprosy of Naaman, or who could help him recover from the leprosy. So the servants go and they tell Naaman, and they tell the king, and the king's like, yes, go and see this man. And then he's like, I'm going to even send some letters. So he draws up some letters and sends letters to the king of Israel about Naaman coming and him cleansing him. And so the king of Israel, they get there with the letters about Naaman, and the king is freaking out because he has no idea what's going on. He's like, I think the text says that he's like, who am I that I can heal this man? And so he tears his clothes, and he's like, just kind of frustrated and sad by all of it. And Elisha hears that the king has torn his clothes. And so he sends some messengers to the king to tell him to let the man come to his home, and that he will help him. And ultimately that the Naaman will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So all of this that is going on, these miracles that the Father is working, are still for his glory. These miracles that he is working through Elisha are ultimately still for the glory of the Father, and the glory, like, so that they could see, the other nations could see how the children of the Father, the children of Israel, led and took care of his people. The God of the children of Israel led and took care of his people. And so Naaman comes down to Elisha's house. Elisha sends out a servant, a messenger, to tell him to go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times and he'll be healed. Naaman gets upset by this. He's a person of power and influence, and Elisha didn't even come out and show his face. So he feels some type of way. He feels slighted. He feels frustrated. He's angry. And he goes off on like a little tangent. But eventually his servants talk him into following the instructions of the man of God. And so he humbles himself. Naaman humbles himself, and he does as he's instructed, and ultimately his leprosy is healed. After he sees that he's healed, he comes back to Elisha, and he offers him the reward that he had stated that he would give to the person who could help him. It was like 100, don't quote me on this, but like 100, whatever the weight is of silver and all this different type of stuff. And so Elisha was like, no, thank you. Don't want any of your stuff. And Naaman goes on and, heads back to his house. So after Naaman has left, Gehazi, who is Elisha's servant, he decides that he actually wants in on some of the offer that Naaman had made. And so he goes He slips out of the house, slips out of Elisha's presence, and goes up to Naaman and is like, hey, Elisha's kind of tripping. I'm paraphrasing. Like, Elisha's kind of tripping a little bit. Like, yeah, he'll take some of that stuff and I'll go give it to him. And so he gives him some things, and then Gehazi goes back to Elisha's house. Once he gets back, Elisha asks him, "What, like, where have you been?" He lies and says he hasn't been anywhere. And then Elisha tells him, like, "Hey, I know that my spirit went with you, or his heart went with you, went with him as he went and took those things from Naaman." And he tells him that this wasn't the time to receive money or receive gifts or things from the people for what they were doing. It wasn't that season. And so he tells them that his consequences of doing this is that the leprosy that Naaman had, he would now have it. Gehazi would have it, and his descendants forever. It would be on his bloodline forever. And I completely understand that people like to say that the decisions that we make do not affect our bloodlines. Well, why? What did Gehazi's descendants do here? Nothing. But this text says that they would have leprosy forever because of the disobedience and the lying of Gehazi. Just something to think about. All right, moving to chapter 6. And so, chapter 6, we see more miracles from Elisha. And this one starts with he goes down with the sons of the prophets to cut some wood to build a new, like, meeting place for them, a new, let's say, house or church. I won't say church, a gathering place, to build a new gathering place for them because the current one had become too small. And so while they're down there at the river, they are down there to cut wood, and so they're cutting the wood. And one of the men loses his axe head in the river. Like, as he's swinging the axe, I'm assuming that the axe head flew off, and falls into the river, and it sinks because there's an axe head. Elisha throws in a stick, and the axe head of iron floats according to the text, and the man is able to retrieve it. This is a miracle in and of itself. Why does a stick make an axe head float in a river, and it had already sank to the bottom? So he's out here just performing miracles, and the Father is, is proving to the people that he is actually one of his, and he's actually a man of God through these miracles that are going on. After this, in the chapter, the text tells us that the king of Syria and the king of Israel were at war, but Elisha was providing the king of Israel with the intel regarding the plans of the enemy. And so much so that the king of Syria was questioning his army to say who's a traitor here, who's telling them all of our inside assignment, our inside secrets. And they're telling him, like, no, it's none of us. It's the man of God over there. There's a prophet over there named Elisha, and he's telling the king everything that you're talking about in the privacy of your room. I think it says, like, in your bedchamber. And so the king of Syria is frustrated with Elisha. He sends his people to go and get Elisha, to find out where he is, and then go and get Elisha and bring him to him. And so they come down to Dothan. They come down by night. And then the next morning, when Elisha's servant wakes up, he sees that the enemy has filled the city. The city was entirely full of the Syrian army. And let's see what happens from that point. All right, so we're looking at chapter 6, verses 15 through 17. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and had gone forth, behold, an host compassed of the city, both with horses and chariots. This is the Syrian army that's coming to get him. And his servant said unto him, Alas, my master, how shall we do? Like, so what are we going to do? We're kind of surrounded. Verse 16, and he answered, Fear not, this is Elisha, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. This is a great prayer. This is a prayer that I pray often. Father, open my eyes that I may see what you see, that I may see the things from your perspective and your will. And so this is a great prayer to pray. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. I can just imagine that he was trying to get round about Elisha too, because it ain't say that he had no horses and chariots around him. He said he saw the horses and chariots around Elisha. So I'm going wherever he at, And so how it keeps going. The Elisha, after this, he asked the Father to smite that entire army with blindness. The Father does. And so then he leads them. He leads this Syrian army, into Samaria right to the king of Israel. So the person that they were fighting, Elisha leads them again into like I don't want to say like the lion's den, but he leads them into the enemy into the enemy their enemy's territory, which is actually the king of Israel. And so the king of Israel is super excited. So he's like, "Hey, like, let me kill him." And so Elisha's like, "No, you don't kill. We don't kill prisoners of war." He tells them to feed them and then send them back to their master. And from that point, once the king of Israel fed them and sent them back to their master, they stayed away from the land of Israel. They didn't come back to raid them or war with them any longer. And so after all this, Ben-Hadad, who was one of the kings of Syria, he went up and laid siege on Samaria, again, Israel. And because of this, because he was laying siege on this territory, there was a great famine that came upon the land of Samaria. And it got so bad that one day the king of Israel was walking on the wall when a woman asked him for his help. I'm just telling you guys what the text says. This is in there. Please go read it for yourself. So the woman asked him for his help. He asked her, like, "Hey, what can I do for you?" And she tells him that she and another lady, they had entered into agreement that they would eat their sons. That's how bad the famine was in the land. That's how high inflation had gotten that people couldn't even purchase the things that they needed for food, and they had resulted to cannibalism. And so these two women had agreed to eat their sons, and so they killed the first one's son and ate him. But the next day, the second woman had taken her son when it was time to kill him and eat him, had taken her son and ran away. The king is so upset. Now, this is the king of Israel. He's so upset. He tears his clothes and he vows to kill Elisha. And he sends a messenger to do just that. And Elisha is at his house and all this is going on. He's at his house with some leaders and he tells them divinely from the Father what is happening, the king has sent a man there to cut his head off. And when the messenger arrived, they kept the door shut because ultimately he wanted the king to come up himself. Okay, let's keep on going into chapter 7 because the conversation keeps going. And so let's look at verses 1 and 2 in chapter 7. Then Elisha said, so he's speaking to the messenger through the door. Maybe they have, maybe he has an audience with him now. I'm not sure. But he's speaking to the messenger. And Elisha said in verse 1, "Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria," meaning that there would be no more inflation, that everything would be plenty and be cheap once again. Verse 2, "Then a lord on whose hand the king leaned answered the man of God." So this is one of the king's cabinet, one of the king's leaders. He answered the man of God and said, "Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be?" So he's like, now, even if God himself did it, that ain't going to happen, essentially is what he's saying. And he said, "Behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes." Elisha said this, "but shalt not eat thereof." So basically, Elijah's telling them that the famine is going to end tomorrow, but because this young man this messenger who said that stuff and he's in unbelief, he's going to see it happen, but he's not going to experience it. The next day, everything happens just like Elisha said. The next day, there's some lepers who are hanging out outside the city at the gate. Again, they can't be integrated into society in Israel, so they're hanging out outside the city. They decide that they're going to go over to the Syrians and surrender themselves to the army and see if they will let them live. Their thought process was it's like, hey, they can't go into the city and eat because, there's no food there. There's a famine. And so maybe if they stay there, they're going to die. So maybe they'll go to the Syrian army, see if they would keep them alive, let them survive down there. And if not, they would kill them. And so either way, they would die or they would have an opportunity to live perhaps with the Syrians. So they go up to the Syrian camp. But as they went, the Father made it to sound to the Syrians like a huge army was coming up against them with chariots and horses and soldiers and all this. So the Syrians took off. They fled from the camp without taking anything with them. They took off running and, they ran for their lives and they left everything behind. They left food, they left silver, they left gold, they left horses, they left their tents, they left everything behind. So when the lepers go into the camp, they're like, man, what's going on? They eating and they drinking. They hid some silver, some gold and some stuff. And so then I guess somebody had like a guilty conscience or something, but they decided like, hey, let's go back. We shouldn't just be enjoying all this by ourselves. Let's go back and tell the king what has happened. They go back and tell the king. The king eventually comes down and confirms that the army is fled, and the prophecy of Elisha is fulfilled. The entire city now knows that this is available, and they come out to enjoy it, the spoils or whatever. And as Elisha said in his prophecy, the flour was sold for a shekel, and the 2 measures of barley was for a shekel as well. So the inflation was over, and there was abundance once again in the land of Samaria. And the young man who doubted Elisha, who was in unbelief, he was trampled by the people as they as they ran out of the city to get to the camp. And so that part of the prophecy was fulfilled as well. Let's move on into chapter 8 and we'll finish up, all right? So chapter 8 begins with Elisha instructing the Shunammite woman, the same woman that had built him the house, whose son he had revived and all those. He instructs her and her family to leave because the father was bringing a 7-year famine on the land. And so she does as he says, and she goes and dwells in the land of the Philistines for 7 years. After the 7 years were ended, she comes back to ask the king to restore her her home and all the land that she previously had. It just so happens, so this goes to show how the father, first of all, it goes to show favor, how there are conversations happening about you and on your behalf for your benefit in rooms that you're not even in yet, and rooms that you may never even be in, that people are talking about you and your assignment and what the father has done in your life. But let's keep going. They're talking about you in rooms that you didn't even know that you were being discussed in. So this is happening to her. Gehazi is in his audience with the king, and the king is asking him like, "Hey, tell me all the things that Elisha has done." So Gehazi is telling him about all the things he's done. He's telling him how there was a woman who Elisha had restored her son, and then as he was telling her that, the woman came in, and Gehazi's like, "Hey, this was the woman that I was just telling you about." And so the king was like, "Oh my goodness, wow!" And she he asked her about it, and she corroborates the story. And then the king says, "Restore everything to her, give her her house back and her land, and give her a portion of everything that was reaped off of the land while she was gone." All because Gehazi was having a conversation about her in the room with the king at the right time, and she was coming in at the right time. Come on, favor. That's going to happen for somebody. And so after that interaction, the text tells us that Elisha is now has an interaction with Hazael. And so Hazael is the king, one of the kings of Syria. Um, and well, no, he's one of the kings, like leaders in Syria. And so the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, had become sick, and so he had sent Hazael to Elisha to ask him if he was going to recover from his sickness. And so Elisha tells Hazael from the father prophetically that he will recover, but the father also showed him that he will still die. So essentially, like, hey, yeah, he's going to recover from the sickness, but the sickness isn't going to be what kills him. He's still going to die. And then Elisha looks upon Hazael and starts weeping. And he's like, hey, what's going on? And Elisha tells him that the father has shown him that he will kill the king and do wicked and terrible things to the people of Israel. That he will, we don't have to get into the details, you can read it for yourself, but he will do some very wicked things to the people of Israel. And Hazael's like, hey, how can somebody like as small as him, as insignificant as him, do something like that? And then Elisha tells him that the father also revealed to him that he was going to become king of Aram, so become king of Syria. And so he returns. Ben-Hadad asks him, hey, what did Elisha say? And he tells him that he will recover. But the next day, just as Elisha had prophesied, Hazael goes in to the king, and he kills him, and he becomes the king in his place. After this, the chapter goes on to tell us more about Jehoram, king of Judah. So I was telling you guys last week that as we go through the kings, it's going to kind of go back and forth with the kings a little bit. So we spent a lot of time talking about Elisha and the king of Israel. So another little piece here goes on to talk about the kings of Judah going on at the same time. And so it tells us about Jehoram, king of Judah. Let's look at verses 16 through 19. And I happen to put these in out of the NLT, so I'm just going to read them to you out of the NLT because I don't have it up. I don't have my Bible open either. Verse 16 through 19, this is the NLT. Jehoram, son of King Jehoshaphat of Judah, began to rule over Judah in the 5th year of the reign of Joram, who is also Jehoram, son of Ahab, king of Israel. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. But Jehoram followed the example of the kings of Israel. So up until this point, primarily the kings of Judah were doing pretty good. You know, they were following the ways of the Father. There was a few hiccups here and there, but for the most part, they were doing pretty decent. But Jehoram, the king of Judah, does not do that. It says that he was as wicked as the kings of Israel, like Ahab, which we're going to see in a second. So let's keep going. And was as wicked as King Ahab, for he had married one of Ahab's daughters. And remember, the text tells us that wives at this time were pulling the hearts of husbands away. I'm not going to get myself in trouble with that. So Jehoram did what was evil in the Lord's sight, but the Lord did not want to destroy Judah, for he had made a covenant with David and promised that his descendants would continue to rule, shining like a lamp forever. That's like, let it be said. That's what I desire. Let it be said that even if people out here in my bloodline after I'm gone being wicked, that because the Father made a covenant with me, that he's being merciful and gracious unto them. Thank you, David, because he would have took all them out for how Jehoram was acting. So we see here that Jehoram is wicked. He's introduced things into Israel. It's followed after Ahab. So Ahab, I mean, he not only ushered in idolatry, but he also built statues of idols. He built high places, like places of worship for idols. He was very wicked, and we see that Jehoram is doing that as well, because he followed after the ways of Ahab, his father-in-law. We also see that Jehoram, king of Judah, he does wicked, as we just talked about. And during this time, the Edomites, when the text, I believe it was on midweek, we talked about, maybe I didn't mention it, but there was a period of time in the end of the end of First Kings, where the text tells us that the Edomites, they didn't have a king. And during that time, they actually came under kind of the kingship of the king of Judah, and they followed him. But when Jehoram got in here and started going crazy, going wild, the Edomites revolted against them, and made another king for themselves over their nation. And so he tried to go out and go to war against them and bring them back, but he was unsuccessful. And so after Jehoram died, then Ahaziah became the next king of Judah. Again, this is not the same Ahaziah that was once king of Israel. This is a completely different Ahaziah, and he is the king of Judah now. And so let's keep going. Verse 25 through 27 of chapter 8. Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, began to rule over Judah in the 12th year of the reign of Jehoram, son of Ahab, king of Jerusalem. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. His mother was Athaliah, a granddaughter of King Omri of Israel. Ahaziah followed the evil example of King Ahab's family, and he did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as Ahab's family had done, for he was related by marriage to the family of Ahab. And so the chapter ends. We see that Ahaziah and Jehoram, they go to battle against Ahaziah, the king of Judah, and Ahaziah, the king of Judah, and Jehoram, the king of Israel, go to battle against Hazael, the king of Syria. And in the battle, Jehoram was wounded, and Ahaziah went to visit him in his city. And that's how we end it. So now we end this passage on chapter 8 with Jehoram being the king of Israel and Ahaziah being the king of Judah, which I think is an exact flip flop of how we started in chapter 1. But that's all I got for you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining and watching the video tonight, especially since I know I'm usually live and I wasn't this time. So thank you guys for the premiere with me. For midweek this week, we're going to be looking at Second Kings chapter, we're on chapter 9. I believe 9 through 13 is what I said, 9 through 13 or 14, one of those. So go ahead and be reading up on those things and looking into those things. As always, if you desire to give, that information is down in the box. If you want to get in touch with me, that information is down in the description box as well. I will see you guys soon. I might even go live on Wednesday, but I'm not making any promises since I missed you guys tonight. But thanks again so much for joining. I love you, but more importantly, listen, the Father loves you. Let him love you, okay? Start before you're ready and don't stop. I'll see you guys next time.